By the end of this video, you're either going to love what I have to say or hate it. But either way, this whole thing is much bigger than just the biggest lie they've been telling us since we were kids. I believe this problem is the reason why the world is as broken as it is today.
Live every moment of every day in the best way possible, but for a lot of people, it's literally unimaginable.
So let's start off with the folks that are in the thumbnail. Bill Nye the Science Guy is well known for his show that educated children just about everywhere, and he even wrote a couple of books. And Neil deGrasse Tyson is an actual astrophysicist. However, this isn't about them specifically, more rather something that they've been saying for years, if not decades. This is either one of two things: a lack of awareness about the information that they have, or a straight up lie. I'm not calling them liars, but if they knew the things that I'm about to tell you, well, I guess you know what to do if the shoe fits.
The Earth possibly be 3 billion years old.
But when it was born, some 4.5 billion years ago,
is thought to be 4.54 billion years old.
That's right, the age of the Earth. We've heard a lot of information on both sides saying that the Earth is old and creationists saying that the Earth is young, and I'm just here saying that we have no idea. This isn't an attack on these two people because I personally love listening to them from time to time. However, if a world-renowned scientist says something that's just flat out wrong, it shouldn't be brushed under the carpet and just ignored. We should question why anyone with Google and a remedial ability to think can clearly see the holes in the logic of this.
About 15 million years ago,
30,000 years ago.
65 million years of isolated evolution.
So the age of the Earth, why does it matter? That specifically is the big important thing that I'm going to talk to you about at the end of this video. This goes beyond science too, by the way, but first we need to understand how the age of things is determined, how this process works, and if it's a trustworthy process. So I'm going to go over 3 different types of radiometric dating and explain how they work and why they actually don't. First up is the most famous version of radiometric dating, carbon dating. Carbon dating essentially works by measuring the amount of carbon-12 and carbon-14 in an object, but how does it get there in the first place? And real quick, I just want to say, I know that some people would say that you're just a Bigfoot believing YouTuber. Why should we trust you? None of this information actually comes directly from me doing experiments. I didn't do any hands-on research. What I did is what I would have you do. Look at all of the moving parts of this machine and then zoom in. Take a look at how much of it is actually a known fact and how much of it is just an arrogant assumption. You don't need to be a Jedi to know that that's not how the Force works.
We'll use the Force. That's not how the Force works.
Cosmic rays hit the Earth's stratosphere, combining with nitrogen and create carbon. This also creates various isotopes of carbon. But for the ease of understanding, I'm going to substitute that word with types of carbon. So there are various types of carbon. Carbon-12 is a stable form of the element. It's durable and will not decay even after 5,730 years. However, carbon-14 is unstable. After 5,730 years, half of the carbon-14 that is in a plant or animal will decay. This decay rate is constant and does not speed up nor slow down. It is also said to be unaffected by anything around it. No flood, rain, lightning, radiation, or anything is said to be able to change its speed in one direction or the other, kind of like the cashier at a grocery store when there's a long line. But how does this carbon get into stuff to be used to date things? Well, the carbon is absorbed by plants, and the plants are eaten by animals, and those animals are eaten by other animals or humans. Because of this process, you and I both have carbon-12 and 14 in our bodies right now. Using the rate of decay, it's said that we're able to estimate the age of living things, but only living things. Rocks don't absorb carbon, so you can't carbon date a rock. So let's use a mammoth as an example. A young mammoth would have equal amounts of carbon-12 and carbon-14, showing that it hasn't been around for very long. However, when the mammoth dies, the carbon levels are no longer being replenished, and the unstable form of carbon-14 starts to decay. To make this easier, we're going to use some very round numbers to understand it. If we found a mammoth that had 100 carbon-12 molecules, but only 6.25 carbon-14 molecules, that means it's gone through 4 half-lives. You could think about it being divided by 2 4 times. 100 divided by 2 is 50, and that divided by 2 is 25. and so on and so forth. We take the decay rate of the half-life, which is said to be 5,730 years, and multiply it by the corresponding half-lives it's gone through. In this case, it's 4 half-lives. So you multiply 4 by 5,730, which would mean a mammoth carcass with this many missing carbon-14 molecules would be 22,920 years old, give or take a few hundred years. This is how carbon dating is said to work, but you probably missed all of the assumptions I had to use in order for it to work. So where does the carbon come from? From the stratosphere to the plants, but who's to say the plants absorb an equal amount of both carbon-12 and carbon-14? Now, we assume that all plants and all animals absorb an equal part of carbon-12 and carbon-14, but when a particular mammoth skin was sent into 2 separate labs, the age that was given back from both of them was very, very far from being similar. One sample of the mammoth skin was dated at 29,500 years old, and the other sample that the opposing lab was given said that it was 44,000 years old. That's a huge difference. This mammoth skin was aged differently by 14,500 years. And that means if a tiger, a saber-toothed tiger, ate one part of the hide but not the other, it would cause the tiger to appear a lot younger or older depending on what part it absorbed itself. So we have to assume that plants absorb equal parts carbon-12 and carbon-14. And then we also have to assume that equal parts of carbon-12 and carbon-14 are then eaten by animals and so on. We don't know how much carbon-12 and carbon-14 something absorbs, nor do we know how much it all ends up with. It's all an assumption. On top of that, fluctuating carbon levels in the air have been changing for the last 100 years since humanity has continued to pump more pollutants into the air. This means we don't have a standard by which to gauge how much carbon a mammoth hide should have, because we've always had a fluctuating level of carbon in the air. And considering the radiometric dating wasn't developed until 80 years ago, I think we may have missed the bus on carbon dating and any hope for it to be accurate. This matters because we also use the amount of carbon in the air to assume how much carbon should be in an animal. You can't use your atmosphere as a standard if it's been constantly changing. Carbon dating is by far the worst way to age anything. These are factual variables that cannot be predicted nor controlled, and the idea that we know some of these things is not scientific to say the least. You have to assume the absorption of carbon-12, the absorption of carbon-14, the amount of carbon-12 eaten, and then how much is dispersed by the animal. But hey, at least we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the decay rate cannot be changed nor affected by anything at all.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
But hey, don't worry, we have other things to age the Earth, like the ever-stable and faithful element uranium! Also, before I get into uranium, I have one final piece of information that will actually knock down any hope radiometric dating has to be considered reliable. It's been downplayed since it came out, but I think that's because it went against the grain of what modern-day voodoo scientists want to preach to you. On top of that, fluctuating carbon levels in the air have been changing for the last 100 years since humanity has continued to pump more pollutants into the air. This means we don't have a standard by which to gauge how much carbon a mammoth hide should have, because we've always had a fluctuating level of carbon in the air. And considering the radiometric dating wasn't developed until 80 years ago, I think we may have missed the bus on carbon dating and any hope for it to be accurate. This matters because we also use the amount of carbon in the air to assume how much carbon should be in an animal. You can't use your atmosphere as a standard if it's been constantly changing. Carbon dating is by far the worst way to age anything. These are factual variables that cannot be predicted nor controlled, and the idea that we know some of these things is not scientific to say the least. You have to assume the absorption of carbon-12, the absorption of carbon-14, the amount of carbon-12 eaten, and then how much is dispersed by the animal. But hey, at least we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the decay rate cannot be changed nor affected by anything at all.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
So how long is uranium's half-life? Well, unlike carbon, uranium decays extremely slow and turns to lead. Most commonly used is the uranium type 238. Uranium-238 decays into lead and does so over the course of 4.5 billion years. However, the ratios used to date are different than carbon since part of the uranium decays away. But first, where does uranium come from and how is it formed? It's theorized that uranium forms naturally on the Earth and over millions of years with a great deal of pressure, heat, water, rock, and Earth, poof, we have uranium.
I suppose you go along and then suddenly, poof.
Poof. Poof.
However, some scientists believe that the majority of uranium we have on Earth is formed inside dying stars, and then when their supernova event occurred, it blasted all the uranium it had within themselves throughout all of space, and some of that radioactive stuff ends up falling to Earth hundreds of millions of years ago. Remember that part because it's going to be important. So the way uranium is used to date the age of something is by being contained within a non-porous type of stone that can keep all of the stable and unstable molecules together. Doing this prevents the stable uranium from falling out or escaping to give an inaccurate measurement, such as this piece of zircon, which was dated at 4.5 billion years. This shows that the zircon was formed millions of years after the Earth finished forming. So using this process, the shadow scientists, which is what I'm calling them since I can never find out who these people are that make these big breakthroughs, have said that Earth is estimated to be about 4.5 billion years old. But again, I bet you didn't catch all the clever assumptions that we had to make in order for uranium dating to even mean anything. Uranium is theorized to form naturally in the Earth. Now I'm going to say that again, but a little bit slower. Uranium is theorized to form naturally in the Earth. So we don't actually know if it does form in the Earth, or if millions of years ago, a 4 billion year old chunk of uranium hit the planet from a dying star. We're using something that may or may not even come from our planet to age our planet.
That don't make no sense.
And this isn't even an opinion, it's just a piece of factual information. It's theorized but not proven that uranium forms naturally. It's also theorized that it's like most heavy metals. It's formed in stars with an intense amount of pressure and heat. So even if uranium dating works perfectly, it may not even come from Earth, meaning it's probably best not to age a rock with something that doesn't come from that rock. It's like using football rules on a basketball court. But even if it was proven to form naturally on Earth, again, we don't know how the first 1,000 years starts for uranium. The uranium could be forming a lot slower than we think it takes to form. It's assumed that uranium forms in the Earth after millions of years, and then billions of years later, lead is formed from the decaying uranium isotope. Basically, we don't know how much lead uranium-238 starts with. It could be 0, or it could be forming at 0.5 times the rate that uranium forms. Or even worse, uranium may not even come from Earth. So using uranium to date the Earth is extremely problematic. Mainstream science just doesn't want you to know about that, because then all of their guesses just become problematic to say the least. So it may not be accurate, but even if it was accurate, it might not be accurate to our planet. So let me kind of sum this up. Do we know if uranium truthfully and honestly comes from the Earth?
I don't know.
Does uranium form purely on its own, or does lead form alongside it?
You know, like, if I don't know, like, never know, you know, like.
We have other elements that we can use to age the Earth, but why are we using something that may not even come from Earth?
We don't know.
Now, this is best outlined by this article here, stating that it's a strong possibility that uranium comes from dying stars more so than it does from our own planet. According to these theories, the Earth's uranium was produced in one or more supernovae. It goes into detail about uranium and how it's used to date the age of the Earth, but for some reason, still believes that the material from the stars can be used to date something that it didn't have contact with until it crashed on Earth. It's essentially what I explained with the containment of uranium. The entire article is also in the description to be read if you'd like. It's not the most entertaining thing, but it has a lot of information. So again, this points to the possibility that uranium was never here during Earth's creation, and could have been around millions of years ago, but appears to be older than it is because uranium itself came from somewhere else. However, we do have other elements that we can use to age the Earth, and this is where we turn to potassium. Pure potassium does not form in nature because of its high reactivity. I'm sure most of us have seen what happens when it touches water. So when you find potassium in nature, it's always going to be a part of a mineral. It's found in clay, granite, and the subscribe button on this channel. But this is much more likely to be a natural forming element that has a very slow decay rate. We could potentially use potassium to date the Earth instead of uranium, which in my opinion and experience with this topic is probably one of the better elements to use. The type of potassium we're looking at for this is potassium-40. This decays into argon-40 and calcium-40 and is said to take 1.25 billion years to go through one half-life. Again, this decay rate is constant and does not speed up nor slow down. However, we run into the same issue as we did with uranium-238. We do not know how much argon-40 and how much calcium-40 is formed alongside with potassium. It could be that it forms at the same rate or slower rate, but the fact that you can't find pure potassium in nature is another reason to just say, we don't know. We don't know how much calcium and argon potassium starts with. We don't know how much lead forms with uranium. We don't even know for sure that uranium forms naturally on the Earth. And we don't know how much carbon is transferred from sky to plant to animal to other animal and then to human and so on. The entire problem I have isn't even against science. It's against arrogance. Let's pretend all of this represents some portion of a machine and you're planning on cranking this thing up for the first time ever. Would you be willing to risk this machine exploding in your face when you can't guarantee anything? Not the power source, not the electrical connections, or even which buttons do what. None of this can be confirmed and doesn't even go through the basic scientific method we learned in school. 1. Ask a question about something you can observe, and you can't observe the decaying isotope over the course of 5,730 years. 2. Doing backgrounds, I'm not even going to finish that because it just fails right at the very start. They're looking at elements that decay quickly, and then they're assuming that it works for every single other element over the course of billions of years. It's like when I was 5 years old, I looked at dirt and I thought, dirt's brown. Chocolate's brown. Is dirt chocolate? No, it was dirt. Just because something looks good doesn't mean that it is. Sometimes it's just complete bullshit. And before I explain why I made this video at all, when I really just cover monsters and treasure, I want to pull the curtain back and reveal the last shred of hope that radiometric dating has.
I said come back tomorrow! As you ungrateful creatures think yourselves lucky that I'm giving you audience tomorrow instead of 20 years from now.
The decay rate staying constant is the entire framework of radiometric dating. If that doesn't work, none of it works. And guess what? It's not a constant. And here's the proof to back it up. It's impossible to predict exactly when a given atom of a substance will emit a particular particle, but the decay rate itself over a long period of time is constant. Or, at least, that's what we thought. But if physicists at Stanford and Purdue are correct in their findings, the whole theory of constant radioactive decay rates could be thrown out the door. I'm going to skip ahead, but I'm going to link this down in the description if you want to read the whole thing. As the researchers poured through published data on specific isotopes, they found disagreement in the measured decay rates, odd for supposed physical constants. Checking data collected at Brookhaven National Laboratory on Long Island and the Federal Physical and Technical Institute in Germany, they came across something even more surprising. Long-term observation of the decay rate of silicon-32 and radium-226 seemed to show a small seasonal variation. The decay rate was ever so slightly faster in winter than in summer. There's multiple sources that go over the findings of Stanford and Purdue, and while this is not a relatively new thing, it's a breakthrough that means a lot, and not surprisingly, it hasn't been looked into since. This variation was said to have a very minimal change in the speed, but still, it has variations in speed. If this has a compounding effect, then a very small percentage could change into a huge change after 1,000 years of being in an ice age type era. From what it looks like, all you need to mimic these effects is to be cut off from the sun and be very cold. So if there was perhaps an event that caused things from underground to come to the surface, they could have been suffering from this increased decay rate at speeds faster than we've ever realized. But because they're brought back up to the surface, the decay rate stabilized and appears normal. So let me do the number part because that's low-key kind of fun for me. So if after 12 months, the decay rate increases by 0.00001%. And to put that into perspective of how small that is, if you get paid $100,000 a year and you got a 0.00001% raise, you'd get paid, it's too funny, you'd get paid an extra penny that year. So if after 12 months the decay rate increases by 0.00001%, but has compounding effect for every year it's cut off from the sun, that would mean at 2 years it would be 0.00002%. And if we jump ahead and assume, like everybody does when they do their voodoo science, it continues to double each year. All it would take is 30 years of being cold and cut off from the sun to have the decay rate increase by over 5,000%. And as a reference, if you get paid $100 a day and you got a 5,000% increase, you'd be getting paid $5,000 a day. Now, this is all just a theory, but so is everything else with radiometric dating. And that's the dirty little secret somebody out there doesn't want you to know. Why? I honestly don't know. I don't think it matters that much, to be honest. I personally think the age of the Earth being known is one of the silliest things to hide. We pretend to know everything about every major event that the Earth has gone through, but that's just a lie. We don't know how the unstable elements on our planet have been affected over the course of hundreds of thousands, if not hundreds of millions of years. And this really proves my point. The assumptions of radiometric dating and radiometric decay are actually all debunked with this information. We just don't know how much any of this has been affected, and claiming that things happened millions of years ago is just as good as science fiction at this point. But despite all the factual information, I know that some people will never believe this because this all came from a guy with a cowboy hat doing YouTube videos. And honestly, I'm okay with that. It's not a big deal. At this point, those people that are rejecting this information are more rejecting truth than it is the actual information. All of this came from people that have a collective of hundreds of years worth of schoolings under their belts, not actors pretending to be scientists. So not only do we have to assume everything that we went over, but then we also have to assume that throughout the so-called 4.5 billion years that the Earth has existed, that there has not been a single lightning storm, a global cataclysmic event, a meteor, a worldwide flood, a solar flare, a cosmic storm, or universal event that has ever affected the unstable elements on our planet. I'm sorry, but I just don't have enough faith to believe that. Bigfoot literally has more evidence for it than radiometric dating has for its credibility. But what does that mean for you and me? Well, simply put, the world is still a mystery, which leads me to my big important why of this whole video.
United States Attorney General Merrick Garland sharing a critical update in the Department of Justice's review of the horrific mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas.
Students plan to carry out an attack.
A new report from the CDC shows the number of deaths by suicide among adolescents and young adults is on the rise.
This is why the age of the Earth being known, or us even having an idea of that, is so important to me. And if you'll give me a few moments on my soapbox, maybe you'll end up agreeing or at least understanding why this matters. Every single day, it feels as though we're being introduced to a new tragedy. Everyday people are taking their own lives, or the lives of others, and for what? For a 5-minute talk about it on the news? Just so they can feel like they were somebody for an afternoon? People no longer seem to have a purpose. So why is that? I may be wrong, but I feel as though it's because of humanity's constant need to box up everything and act as though we are all-knowing when we're not. We say we know how old the Earth is. We know when the dinosaurs lived and died. We know how humanity formed from cells to fish to monkeys and so on and so forth. These people want you to believe that they know all of these things, so they use clever jargon to make them feel better about themselves. A scientific hypothesis is just a guess based on information that they can link with it. My belief on Bigfoot is also technically a scientific hypothesis too, but that doesn't make it a fact. It doesn't mean that it's real. These people, because I can't really call them scientists anymore, say we know A, so we know B, so we know C, and so on and so forth. But in reality, the only thing we know are modern day observations about the world. We don't know when the dinosaurs died or even what they looked like. In fact, the whole theory of humans forming from an ancient ape to modern-day man was actually based on deformed fossils and carnival attractions like that of P.T. Barnum. Scientists want to place everything into a box because they find their self-worth in knowledge, even if that means they have to make up stories to go along with their guesses. Their organization is attempting to demystify the world in a way that causes all of us to feel as though there's nothing out there we haven't already seen, which leaves most of us these days feeling as though we're playing a game that's already been beat. And if you've ever played a game with all the cheat codes on, then you know how boring and pointless it can get. We look at the paths the world has given us, and if we don't conform to them, then we're looked down upon. If we choose not to stick to the status quo and forge our own trail, then we're considered the problem child, as they say. Don't get me wrong, organization is great, but at some point, it becomes detrimental to your own mental health. It's like trying to look so in shape you end up being mad and angry all the time because you're hungry. It's possible to have too much of a good thing, and in this situation, it's too much knowledge. Now it's just way worse because we don't even actually have the knowledge that we're claiming to have. Doing this actually ruins a lot of what humans need just to feel complete and content in the world based on Tony Robbins' 6 basic human needs: security, love and connection, contribution, significance, growth, and variety. Without mystery in the world, it's so much more difficult to feel like we're able to contribute. And there's this illusion of variety, but after a while, it fades. We end up stuck in a constant state of security, and that never goes away. And our ability to grow as individuals is strictly guided by boundaries within society. And all of this takes away from our significance, unless we end up having family, which isn't for everybody, especially if you're a teenager or you're in your early 20s and you just don't want to start a family yet. Or if you've already raised your family and you're just making your way through the world again. So that leaves us kind of stuck, hoping that we can have the only thing that's still available, which is love and connection. And in my personal opinion, I think that's where the toxic hookup culture comes from, because we're desiring to feel something, but in the wrong way. I know what you're thinking. Oh, and all of this is based on radiometric dating? No, it isn't. It's based on arrogance and the inability to admit ignorance. And that's where radiometric dating lives. We don't know how long the Earth has been around, and we don't know how long ago dinosaurs existed. We just truly don't know these things because they're all based on a flawed system. It's not even an opinion at this point, but just an objective fact that I know that some will never agree on, no matter how much factual information they're presented with. The sad truth is that evidence could be right in front of some people's faces, but they'll never accept it because it goes against what they already believe. Some people will literally reject truth, even if it's proven to them. But honestly, what I'd like from this video is to hopefully impact one of you. One of you out there that feels like you're suffocating from all the boxes that the world has put around you, and hopefully help you find a little bit of relief. We don't have everything figured out, but that's okay. That's what makes life an adventure. You get to think and wonder and imagine in so many ways that you couldn't otherwise. And you know, if you read about cryptids and encounters, it's one of the best ways to open your eyes to the possibilities of the world. Like, was the Dover Demon a goblin or an alien or something else? Is the Patterson-Gimlin footage truly proof that a bipedal primate made its way over the land bridge to North America? Perhaps it could be a Gigantopithecus. Or is the Mothman truly a mistaken crane that followed a speeding car down the highway? Or was it actually an unnatural creature from somewhere that we have no knowledge of? We don't know a lot of things, and the world is still a mystery for all of us to explore. And where mystery lies, adventure awaits. If you like what I do and you want to help support the channel, the best way to do that is on Patreon. I post every so often on there, but if that's not your thing, just check out this video that YouTube seems to think you'll love, and I'll see you there.